Please welcome Michael Owens, Business Information Security Officer with consumer reporting agency giant Equifax. Good morning, Michael.
Thank you. So let's get into this. I want to make sure that today we are, again, talking about managing risk and cybersecurity, third-party management programs, not only what we've been doing, and not specifically to the pandemic, but with all the things that were mentioned earlier, the dynamics that are changing and how we can handle them. As mentioned before, I'm the Information Security Officer at Equifax. I came in Equifax post-breach and was immediately thrust into this area of how we can effectively communicate what we're doing within our program, how we can turn things around, and how we effectively go out and ensure that we are looking at our vendors, our suppliers, our resellers, and ensuring that they're doing the things that they need to do as well. We talked about uncertainty, right? And I think this is one of the themes of the summit and how we can better have cybersecurity risk. And that is one of the things that, I think we can delve into a little bit more today. So when talking about that, I want to just kind of lay out the landscape. I know I'm with some really smart, savvy people today. So, I'm not going to bury you guys in slides. I don't want to dig too much into it, but I really want to talk about just the landscape a little bit, just to kind of set what we're talking about and why we're talking about this issue today. So many of you may have heard about some of these stats, but I just want to throw a few out there. Over 20% of organizations know that third parties pose a high inherent risk. We know that through summer research that's been done, less than 25% of cybersecurity teams really feel that third parties are to improve their security measures. We know that we're really not confident in them. 57% of organizations do not have an inventory of all the third parties that they share information with. That is vitally key, and we'll talk about that in a minute. 63% of breaches are caused by vulnerabilities from third parties. And that's, whether you're talking about the government, Target, there's been lots of instances out there where that shift that we talked about in some of the third part or some of the security vectors themselves, where hackers and, actors are going to is much more within that supply chain area. And this one, I don't know how this number really came up. I looked at some stats around it. But it says the average organization uses 6,000 third-party applications to do their daily business. That's a lot of companies. That's a lot of people that have some kind of aspect into your company. And obviously, looking at that landscape is where we have to be. So when looking at the drivers and considerations, these are just top of the mind things. Again, I really want to kind of raise this level of consciousness around what's happening around this space. So I look at two areas. I call them the 3 M's and the 3 B's. And this is also something that I've kind of gleaned from RSA. And when they're running their third-party risk management program, they look at kind of these as well. And, these are really just the drivers and then the considerations around them. So when we talk about the 3 M's, it's really around modernization, mandates, and what we call malice, right? Really simple. The modernization is what we all know now, right? It's digital transformation. It's applications that are moving towards the cloud. It is the fact of using, SaaS applications for, everything from our HR systems to our email even. So that is really one of the key drivers. Obviously, the mandates, that is the legislation that we're talking about, federal, from a state level, which we're seeing like with CCPA and NYDFS. So we're seeing a bunch of laws are being created this year. There's going to be many more with other states that have legislation going on to ensure that, people's privacy is really taken into account and forcing companies to do something about that. So those mandates are obviously one of the key drivers. And then malice, right? I mean, just, from national or international state actors down to, grieving insider threat things that we see all the time. We really have to look at the malice that's going on and ensuring that people are, we have an oversight of that. And then, shifting to what I call the 3 B's. These are really considerations. And really what I think about is how are you know that you're actually, building a program and what are those things you're really going to look for at a very high level? It's baseline, business, and benefit. And what do I mean by that? The baseline is really kind of simple. It's establishing a methodology, whatever methodology that may be, which is understanding the metrics, the variables that you're looking at, How are you capturing those? And then ensuring that those fit in with your business objectives. Fits in with your overall success criteria. Knowing where you want to end up, what type of program you want to build, what kind of budget you're going to need, what kind of capacity you need to build, all go into that baseline that you need to have. Second aspect of that is the business, which is, ensuring that you're looking at a third-party cyber risk program from a strategic aspect, not just a tactical perspective, but ensuring that you're aligning those with the actual strategic business objectives. Looking at this to truly what it is, right? Risk management, not simply around compliance. There's plenty of other areas we can talk about compliance and how that kind of fits in. But with this, we're squarely looking at being able to quantify, understand, and take action based on those risks that are out there. And then the last one is the benefits, right? Understanding, but also being able to convey those benefits that come from having a third-party cyber risk management program and what those expected outcomes for those are going to be, and being able to effectively communicate how that's going to help your business, your consumers, and be able to keep your data safe overall. So what are some of those key challenges? Again, I mentioned the fact that, my background has kind of been on both sides of this, ensuring that, I'm actually building, developing these new third-party risk management programs and understanding what we're taking into account. And also from the other side, being audited myself and having to, explain what those things are, what we're doing, how we've have the security domains in check, and we make sure we're doing the things we need to do internally to make sure we're safe. So, I want to hit on just some of these, so I'm sure there'll be some questions afterwards. But as we mentioned before, the shift that we're really seeing where now there's so many aspects that's really moved to the cloud or moved to third-party risk, moved to third parties, suppliers, vendors, brokers, resellers. The landscape has really shifted on us because we're really in an environment where we have farmed so much of our processes out to other companies. And this is not simply within the overall space. This is within cybersecurity itself. Within our information security programs, a lot of this work we're doing is being outsourced, as well as some of the key areas within many of our businesses that are out there. And looking at the current practice and technologies that go on with setting up a cyber risk management program, they do tend to be very costly. And not only the cost, the inaccuracies that come with that, and then the fact that they're insufficient a lot of times. And there's multiple reasons for that, and I like to talk about. We can see a lot of times we have issues with a lot of companies that you'll see to the right of the slide where I had listed out some of those kind of areas where we have challenges. A lot of times what we're seeing is that some companies don't know exactly where even to put the third-party risk management program. Sometimes it winds up being global sourcing because that's where third-party risk has been for a lot of times. These are people that are engaged in contracts. Sometimes you'll find it in legal. Sometimes you'll find it where, through your procurement process. What I'm advocating and what I want to make sure a lot of companies do is explore that idea of bringing it solely within the cyber or information security program. You can then leverage that to ensure that you're working with, your procurement, your sourcing teams, as well as your IT teams and legal teams, but ensure that you're looking overall to bring that in-house so you can really have a much more effective aspect on how that's managed. And then lastly, around as a third-party program really has started to gain much more attention with the C-level people within the organizations from a strategic aspect, and also from boards. I gave a talk not long ago, and we were talking about interacting with boards and how CISOs are now getting much more face time with their corporate boards. So what we're also seeing is, along with that, and seeing headlines about third parties and supply chains being breached. A lot of times what we're starting to see is that within, the board members are becoming savvy. They are. So they're starting to ask about, hey, what's going on with our cyber program? What's going on with the third party? How are we managing those risks? How are those risks now directly impacting our ability to close sales or to, mitigate a risk that's out there? So those are starting to become key challenges because a lot of people have not been used to actually even addressing the board, and much less being able to convey the third party cyber risk program in a way that the board can actually consume and truly understand. So So what does that mean, right? So for an effective program, I really try to break that down really simply in just a few areas. The first step around there is kind of identify and prioritize what we're going to be doing with the program. Second aspect of that is to be able to assess and validate that the program is actually effectively working and how you're carrying it out. And the third part is really reducing the risk and then repeating the process, right? So to delve in this really quickly, really the key around this has to be with identifying and prioritize is first and foremost identifying all the third parties that you're actually doing business with, how you're exchanging information, are you exchanging data, what type of data, where is that data being stored, how is it, ingress and egress from your company, and having a really tight, solid understanding around that. And then categorize them. I've found that a lot of companies struggle with trying to categorize the companies and the risk for those. And one thing I found out and want to make sure that all you guys look at doing is make sure that when the risks are being identified, that they are not the same risk metrics or not the same variables that procurement or sourcing would use, right? Or any other aspects of the company. Make sure they're defined around cyber risk, not just how many records are being exchanged, but what type of records those are, right? How does it fit in with record retention management policies? How does it relate to specific regulatory aspects that are around there? And then, make sure that the due diligence is being done around that. And then for, the assessment and validation, one of those key areas is, you want to create a holistic view of the third-party landscape. Ensure that you're, really making the assessment. I know now with COVID, one of the things I've seen a lot of companies do now, we're doing many more virtual third-party assessments. You're not really able to get there on site. But what I can tell you and what I've found out is you can still have a very robust program around that, making sure that your questionnaires are really spot on. One other aspect of that is particularly ensuring that you're engaging the right stakeholders of the third parties that you're doing the assessment on, ensuring that they know that this is not just a check the box exercise, that this is really something that's going to be key to how this relationship is managed, and whether or not we decide to ultimately do business with you or not is going to be determinant on what this assessment looks like. So there has to be kind of a carrot and a stick to this. And, all of us get questionnaires, and we really kind of get sick of them at some point in time and just go through, formality. But we have to make sure that, particularly now that we can't go on site active with COVID, that we have to really, strengthen that. I've seen companies out there that take kind of a adaptive approach to questionnaires, because the last thing you want to do is be over intrusive with companies. You want to take a light touch and then dig down as necessary. Maybe when you see red flags, maybe when you see things that aren't quite being done, or the company's taking too long to respond. But an adaptive approach to that may help lighten the initial load and then be able to dig down a little more. One area that I want to make sure that we talk about is leveraging some of the technology that's out there, and maybe some of the other groups. If you have a threat intelligence team, if you have potentially a red team that's out there, you have any team that's looking at threats across the landscape, maybe outside of your company, utilize those, leverage those to ensure that, if there's information or chatter out there that you're getting from any of those feeds, check and see if any of your third parties are a part of that. And if so, use that as, leverage to go in and maybe ask more questions around that. Ensuring that you're looking at, AI and any type of automation that you can put into, because if you're capturing more and more variables, you want to make sure that you can sift through that and actually have a shorter time frame from when you can actually turn that assessment around to where you can actually action on that. And then I think, the last aspect of that is, reduce the risk and repeat it. All of this assessment does no good unless you can actually work with the customer, with your third party, to ensure that they're actually reducing that risk. Simply, sending them a report at the end of the day is not good enough. You have to make sure that you're working through an issues management process, remediation process, and then ultimately tracking to ensure they're actually closing out those risks. Because their risk ultimately becomes your risk, And lastly, I'd like to kind of talk about just making sure that you're engaging in kind of a continuous monitoring program. I'm starting to see more companies do that, to where it's not just a once-a-year activity, once a 2 years activity, once every 3 years. This process now has to be much more rapid, because capturing a snapshot is not simply good enough. They can be fine this week, but in 2 weeks they can have some major issues that you may not know about for another 11 or 12 months. And in this rapid pace of change, that's simply not soon enough. You want to make sure that you're taking a holistic look across your threat landscape when it comes to your third parties. What you may find is that certain vendors in certain sectors, you can start to see trends. You can start to group third parties in certain areas where you start to see certain deficits in certain areas. That may help you overall with some of the issue tracking and the remediation from out there. And then lastly, I think it would be fair to mention what some of you are probably already seeing out there in a lot of ways is being able to leverage some third parties, which is funny, using third parties to kind of leverage and enhance the capabilities of your third party management cyber program, which is looking at companies like BitSight or Risk Recon, looking at some of the companies out there like maybe CyberGRX or TrueSight that are truly broadening the scope in this and doing some of that heavy lifting, so you won't have to as much. So those are, I just wanted to give you kind of a broad overview of some of the things that I've seen, some of the challenges I deal with day to day, some of those drivers, and then how I'm working to build not only a better program from within the firm that I or companies that I work with, but also how we're pushing that needle, trying to get third-party companies to build better cyber risk management programs and ensure that we're taking a keen eye to looking at their programs to ensure that, again, we're not only worried about their risk because we understand that their risk is our risk. So thanks a lot. I appreciate that. I hope I haven't taken up too much time because I want to make sure that we leave time for questions for you guys. So thanks a lot. I definitely appreciate it.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael. Much appreciated. So you talked about kind of red flags there. What are some of the things that you would see as a red flag when if you're looking at a vendor's kind of cyber risk program?
Yeah, so when I'm looking at a company's program, some of the first things I'm going to look at is really what I consider like not the technical things in nature, the questionnaire. I really look at some of the larger, broader things, like where does security fit within the organization, right? Within the third parties or organization. Where does their CISO fit? Does CISO report directly to the CEO? Do they report to the CFO, the CTO? How robust is their program to some extent? I look at, do they have a third-party risk management program actually in place, right? So which would be kind of our fourth party or fifth party, or are they looking at some of the same things that we're looking at? And to get more of the granular stuff, I'll look at, do they actually perform, a rigorous ongoing testing program of any of their environments, through pen testing or regular network testing? Do they have documented security programs? So you start to look at, the maturity of their program overall. Do they actually even have, documentation in place? And then you start to look at, are they, can they back that up with some evidence and artifacts around that?
Absolutely. So it's not the technology; it's whether or not security is baked in is what you're looking for. Does it look like something that they take seriously?
Yeah, I mean, that has to be really the first thing you look at, right? How are they viewing their own security? And, is it outsourced or are they close to it? Do they have an understanding? Can I actually talk to someone on their cybersecurity team, right? Or again, am I talking to someone in the vendor space, right? Or sourcing? So, I've had instances where it took weeks to get someone from a security team even on the phone, and things like that. You can really start to kind of get a gist that this could be problematic.
It's that it sounds like common sense, and the problem with common sense, it's not very common, as they say. So we do have an audience question for you, and forgive me, producer Amy, I did miss the name. Hubert. Good morning, Hubert. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. What's your question for Michael?
Excellent talk, Michael. Really enjoyed it. Learned a lot. Following question, one of the biggest issues we have in our own TPRM program is what are the metrics that we can report to management? What are the appropriate risk metrics to be used in TPRM reporting? Can you shed a little bit of light on what has worked for you in your organization?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge, both from what kind of metrics are you gathering to begin with, and then what metrics are you sharing to the board. The highlight of that is really making it to where they can consume it around, again, aligning with the organization's either risk tolerance or how they can consume it from a standpoint of how it's ultimately keeping them safe. So, I really kind of look at this really trying to hone in on, give a high level of, this is kind of the landscape. These are, red, yellow, green type aspects, and really put it in, we categorize a kind of an inherent risk rating. to say, really the critical high, medium, and lows. We kind of understand that, right? And then, bake that into what that risk looks like based on the type of data that you are engaging with the third party, right? So, a company can have, 20, high vulnerabilities, but if the type of data that you're exchanging with is, non-PCI or non-PII data, then it won't rate highly as a risk, right? So you really want to balance that to show that you have an effective program, right? So simple metrics around how many companies out of your entire landscape have you actually audited this past year, right? And then what those trend lines look like. I like to show that we're being effective and we're being robust in a program, because ultimately, it's got to be funded. So they need to see that it's actually progressing. But you want to show progress. You want to show maturity in the program. I view it as it's much more important to show maturity in your program and that you're able to uncover risk than just quantifying X numbers of this, X numbers of that. That means very little, if they truly don't have an understanding of, there's 61 vulnerabilities. Well, what does that mean, right? So really curtail that around to what the risk to the company is, and then how you're maturing that program to be able to uncover more of those. And if you can tie those to other aspects of your business, particularly to applications that you're utilizing, right? So great, there's vulnerabilities with this vendor, but are they providing data that one of your most critical applications are utilizing, right? So make it relative to things that are important to the business, is what I'd say.
Thank you.
Hubert, does that sort of resonate with you? Is that what you're doing at the moment, or?
Yes, it is actually the biggest individual operational thing that we do in the security team.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Hubert, really appreciate your question. Thank you very much indeed. So have a great rest of the day, great rest of the summit. And up next I think we have Tracy from Meredith Corp, which I think I got right today, Tracy.
You did, yep.
Good. What's your view has changed today? It is another beautiful view.
Yeah, it did. I put a little background back there. So thank you very much. Interesting talk. My question is on you said third party risk, that this was expensive. So have you guys ever tried to do any ROI on what this costs versus what incident response costs when your third parties have issues?
Yes, the short answer is, but it's a very hard calculation. There's probably 101 different ways to be able to calculate that. But you also have to think around there's tons of costs and numbers that have been thrown out there. But when you're talking about risk, it's more than just the inherent risk that you're taking on, right? Reputational risk, right? And the residual risk that comes with that gets really hard to quantify when you're talking about, the stigma that comes with having a large scale breach. When you talk about the ability then to, at Equifax, for instance, within the company I work for now, we're approximately 3 years out from our security incident, and that still weighs heavy on lots of aspects, not only internally with our culture and things we're doing, but with our ability in what we're doing interacting in the marketplace. So trying to put hard numbers around that. I mentioned earlier about trying to mature the program and justify it through the ability to make the organization more safe. If you juxtapose that with incident response, I don't know that you're putting a really I don't like pitting one part of the organization against another. I think, you really have to focus on that intangible part, that, the inherent risk, the residual risk that you look at, and, the overall risk of a reputational risk that comes with this is really one of the biggest drivers. And understand that, these are third parties, so it's not exactly 100% within your control. And so what we know is you can spend an infinite amount of money, right? But that's not going to reduce your risk mitigation down to zero. So there has to be some adjusting there to ensure that you're putting enough information or enough resources into the program to where you are able to feel confident that you are covering most of those bases, and you can convey that to senior leadership, to the board. But it's not an exorbitant amount of money where you continue to spend, and you're not seeing that curve continue to go up with your effectiveness.
Is it sort of fair to say, Michael, that the Equifax have an appetite for this because of the breach, because of the reputational risk that was there? And therefore, what advice would you offer companies who would like to do a program like this, are aware of the expense, but maybe don't have the breach that they can say, because of that, we really need to do this?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to say too that it's so without a doubt. I mean, any company out there that's gone through a breach, they find themselves in a situation where it's a must do, right? But we also talked about regulations and legislation is coming that's forcing more of this as well. But it's not a zero-sum game, right? And it's not a multi-million-dollar rollout for every single organization. You can also do this in incremental steps, right? The idea of getting a program and then maturing it and being able to add more facets to it. But any and every company out there can do some form of third-party cyber risk management, regardless of where they are in the maturity of the organization, and with a healthy respect and appreciation that a lot of companies out there do not have the budget, to really do this as a separate program. But you can start leveraging other pieces of the organization, right? I talked earlier about, your more traditional aspects of sourcing and vendor management and legal and what they're doing. So you can start pulling pieces together and start to leverage that. I also talked about something as, much further down along the lines, which is like being able to use a company like BitSite, right? Companies that are out there, they're just doing risk ratings of companies, and that you can subscribe to a service to be able to take advantage of that. So where you can almost, with a company like CyberGRX, you can request, and I hate to kind of name drop on certain companies. That's not my goal here. But just to lay some context to it, right? So there's ways you can kind of get up and running really quick and then build a much more robust program as you go along.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Tracy, I hope that was helpful.
It was. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed again for your question, Tracy. Really appreciated. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day. Up next, Michael, we have Paul from Innova. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for the intro. Good morning, Michael. The question I have is really centered around how to keep the inventory or catalog of third-party vendors and partners ever fresh. So usually when we get into these annual assessment situations, we find that the information necessary to conduct the assessment isn't there, and we spend many weeks just simply gathering that information across the population of third-party vendors and partners, and it is an absolute huge amount of effort just to do that. So what considerations have you experienced in terms of creating an ever-fresh process to catalog and keep that information, and who really has oversight on making sure that process stays healthy?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's really good, and it is a challenge for a lot of organizations. I think by nature it's kind of disparate, right? And I think that's one of the initial challenges is that, and it varies by different companies. But I've been in environments where each and every organization seems like each and every team is engaging in signing contracts and leveraging vendors and suppliers for doing different things. So one of the first challenges, and I talked about this earlier, is making sure you understand the entire landscape of third parties, right? And who's doing what and who's engaging with people. And then empowering, whether that is through your vendor and your sourcing team, if there's a global team for that, to just start aggregating that. And, a lot of companies find success in using, using solutions that they may already be leveraging, like, Archer, or using something like ServiceNow that your operations and change management may already be using. Your asset management teams may already be using a solution to track software and hardware within the organization that you could potentially leverage that. I know many more companies are starting to use something like a CMDB to be able to aggregate all of those in one area. So if there are disparate teams that are out there, if procurement has their things, and legal is usually a good place to go to because most of those have contracts or maybe have to be signed off by legal. So if you could find like one aspect there, if you can, you have the capacity or wherewithal to say, hey, all of these deals, have to go through security, or have to have a security sign off, or at least a review, then you can start to aggregate that directly through security. If you can make that a stage gate. I know that some companies don't have the capacity within security to be able to do that. But who ultimately has control of that? That is a challenge, right? Because it's an organizational makeup where in some firms, anybody that's a VP or higher can literally go out and sign a contract to be able to, manage their business. In some organizations, it's centralized and has to go up through legal or global sourcing for everything. So it's not a singular answer because different companies work in many different ways. But the key to it, though, is that you have to find some point in which you can have inflection between those companies and triangulate on that, and then use that point to be able to build out your program. Because you're right, from year to year, not only could these vendors change, but what I've seen a lot of times is you may engage a customer, you may engage a third party for service X. But within that year, there may be 2 or 3 other services that someone within the company has leveraged them for. So when we talked earlier about, being able to prioritize and categorize your third parties, that third party may have initially came in as a low risk vendor, right? Which means you may only, take a look at them or do an assessment every other year, or you may send them like a really short, 25 question set of questions. But successor to that, the next month or 3 months, they may have, signed another deal with another part of the organization that now you're exchanging very, high level, high confidential PII information from them. And all of a sudden they went from a low risk to a critical vendor. And now, you have to be able to react to that. And reacting, 10 months later or 11 months later, completely changes your risk posture with that company. So being able to categorize them and really kind of run them through some choke point to where you can effectively get a grip on that is really paramount.
Thank you very much, Dee. Paul, thank you so much for your question. As always, much appreciated, sir. Have a great rest of the day and look forward, hopefully, seeing you again. Michael, I really, really appreciate you getting us going this morning in such fine style, articulate and passionate, which is absolutely key. Thank you very much indeed, Michael Owens. Much appreciated, sir.
Thank you so much. I definitely appreciate it. Have a great rest of Summit, everyone.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Michael. Bye-bye.